I forgot to mention last week that the European leg of the season is over, so this is the home stretch, starting with the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. Of course, we have some things to talk about before the weekend. As I suspected last week, Oliver Berman was the driver who stepped in for Kevin Magnussen, going into his very first full F1 weekend, which doesn't feel like it, but it is, so good for him. We also had major news with Adrian Newey signing with Aston Martin, and this is a huge deal because 20% of F1 races of all times were won by a car he designed. He's been with Williams in the past, with McLaren, obviously with Red Bull as well. We know what this man can do, and he does that particularly well in new regulations, which is exactly what's going to happen in 2026. So, I mean, thank God he's not very involved in the 2025 cars they're going for, but 2026, good luck for everyone else. But at least there's a chance for us in 2025. So I would have wanted him to go to Ferrari or McLaren, but at least it's not Mercedes. So I mean, okay, sure, go to Aston Martin, build the whole thing again. I actually do kind of want to see Fernando Alonso in a great car. Like, I obviously wasn't here for his championships, and also not even for the beginning of last year when Aston Martin were good. So I never really got to see him doing great. And I think that would be interesting to see. And one last thing before this weekend, McLaren has finally come out. Andrea Stella, the team principal, finally said that they were going to favor Lando in 50-50 situations between him and Oscar to help him with the Drivers' Championship. I do think it's a bit too late, but we'll see what happens in Abu Dhabi. I mean, we can only hope. We can only hope. So Baku is a street circuit. It is pretty new to the F1 calendar, joined in 2016. It's a combination of Monza and Monaco, kind of, with long straights like Monza and then narrow and twisty corners like Monaco, with the infamous turn 8, aka the narrowest turn on the F1 calendar, and also the stupid corner. All these characteristics make it very tricky in terms of setup. You obviously want low drag for the straights and then high downforce for the corners. So you basically need a perfect compromise between the two that will allow you to be fastest overall, which is no small feat. And that brings us to the practice sessions. Overall, we had a lot of yellow flags, people going off to the runoffs, kissing and flirting the walls and barriers, and also a few red flags, one for Charles, who crashed in FP1, Franco, who also crashed in FP1, Ocon, who had a problem in FP3, and Ollie, who crashed in FP3 as well. There was a lot of talk about grip, how there isn't any, especially compared to last year, but in general, it's a street circuit, so in the beginning of the weekend, generally not a lot of grip, and there's a lot of track evolution throughout the weekend. In terms of the results, Red Bull were very strong, which was kind of surprising because their car is known for not liking riding curbs and bumpy roads, which is a lot of this circuit. I mean, they did change some curbs from being raised curbs to just painted on, but the track itself is still very bumpy, so I don't know what they figured out there, but good for them, I guess. Ferrari and specifically Charles were strong, which was not surprising. I was very much expecting that, not only because of recency bias, but also Charles specifically is always strong in Baku. McLaren were also kind of up there, but nothing really special. I mean, they're one of the 4 top teams, so they were up there. And Mercedes, much like McLaren, had kind of mixed results. George particularly had an engine change in FP2, and Hamilton was struggling at times, but they were at times the fastest on track in practice, so mixed results. Alpine had a lot of reliability issues. In FP3, as I said, there was a red flag for Ocon, but also he had a power unit issue in FP1, and also Pierre had a battery issue in FP2, so fix your car. It's actually that bad that there's a possibility that Alpine, aka Renault, are going to go for a Mercedes engine from next year or from 2026, but like not going with Renault, which is kind of crazy because like you're a manufacturer, that's like kind of your thing, like that's mostly the only thing that's going for you. Like it would be if a Mercedes was like, I think we'll take the Honda engine this year. Like, what are you talking about? But I mean, it is bad. It is bad. So good luck. And then one last thing worth noting, in my opinion, that Williams were very strong, especially in FP3 and especially in the middle sector with all the corners. So going on to quali, Q1, there was a lot of track evolution, as I said, and again, the risk and reward of going as late as you can, hoping you can get a clean run without making mistakes or getting caught with a red or yellow flags at the end, which unfortunately Lando Norris could not do. I honestly still don't really understand what happened there, if it was just the yellow flag or his mistake, or if one caused the other. Like, no, he didn't cause the yellow flag, but I wonder if him seeing the yellow flag on his steering wheel was what caused him to make that mistake. Either way, he was out in Q1, qualified P17, also breaking McLaren's streak of getting both cars to Q3 this season. And yeah, I kind of lost all hope at that point. But I also did have a lot of hope because most times when Lando is starting from the back, he overtakes like crazy and he finishes in the points pretty high up the rank. So I trusted Lando, but also this is Baku. It's very hard to overtake. So I really didn't know what to expect from the race, but we'll get to it. So Q2, not as nerve-wracking as Q1 was for sure. Something that was kind of funny for me, Ferrari kind of tried to set up a tow down the main straight between Carlos and Charles. That didn't really work, like they didn't time it correctly. And then Charles was on the radio, was like, guys, why am I all alone? Like, I need to get a tow. When is somebody gonna be in front of me to get a tow? And then Carlos had the radio on, said, he keeps missing the tow. They did say later on that they did not try to orchestrate a tow between the two, and Charles was meaning, or like he talked about other cars, but I mean, Carlos said he keeps missing the tow, so I don't know, whatever. It's kind of funny. The actual results though, Ollie qualified P11, just a 10th away from Alex in P10, and Alex in P10, both Williams got into Q3, and Franco Colapinto ended that session in P6. Wow. Great recovery from his crash in FP1. And going to Q3, everyone got their first runs out of the way, and then for the second runs, the weirdest thing I've ever seen happened. Alex went out of the garage with a fan still in his airbox, like connected to his car, which was kind of funny and super embarrassing for Williams. But also I was panicking for a second that it would cause like a red flag or a yellow flag, but they sorted it out and everyone got to go on their second runs except for Alex. And Charles Leclerc, for the 4th time in a row, got pole in Baku. Well done, Charles. And then we have Oscar in P2, Carlos P3, Checo Perez in 4th, out-qualifying Max to his P6 for the very first time this season, George Russell between them, and Franco Colapinto qualifies P9 ahead of Alex, who was not out-qualified by his teammates since 2022. So once again, very, very well done to you, Franco. And then we had some good news for Lando fans because Pierre Gasly was disqualified from quali, something to do with fuel loads. I'm guessing he was underweight. He starts from the back of the grid, so that's one grid place forward for Lando. And also Lewis Hamilton and Esteban Ocon start from the pit with a power unit change, and that moves Lando one more grid place up. So he starts the race from P15. Not as bad. So going into the race, as a Lando girl, obviously it was heartbreaking seeing him getting out of Q1. But as an Oscar girly, I was very glad, obviously, for P2, which is great, but also that he didn't have to worry about team orders and just go for it. The struggles of being an Oscar and Lando fan, and Charles, honestly, because I wanted Charles to win as well. I was torn on the inside, but okay, whatever. So the race starts. Most of the people are on mediums, which turns out to not be a great race tire, but Lando, Alex, and I think a few other people are on hards, so they're like doing the opposite strategy, meaning they'll pit a lot later than most of the grid. So looking out for that strategy was interesting. Going into turn 1, I did not believe everyone was going to go through, but they did. So I mean, I don't know how they do this. So we did survive turn 1, but we did have contact between Yuki and Stroll in turn 3, and they both needed to retire their cars at one stage of the race. So yeah, not a great weekend for both of them. And then we basically had like 2 storylines going on in the same time, with the fight for the lead and the fight between Lando and, Max, but like the midfield. So let's start with the fight in front. So after the first few laps, the leading three are Charles, Oscar, and Checo. Checo is the one who pits first, and he gets out of the pit behind Lando. Now, McLaren kind of failed to cover that off with Oscar coming in the next lap, so they asked Lando to hold him up in the middle sector. I'll hold Checo up, which he does, and that allows Oscar to come into the pits and come out in front of Checo, thank God. By this time, Charles is pretty much pulled away. He has a 6-second gap to Oscar and the rest of the pack, but when he comes to his pit stop, his in-lap and out-lap are fairly slow, so when he comes out, that gap is crunched to, I think, under a second, and that allows Oscar to overtake him for the lead in lap 20. And from that point on, those top three, Oscar, Charles, and Checo, are fighting every single lap. The gap between them does not go over like 2 seconds maybe. So it's lap after lap after lap of Oscar defending from Charles, who was also defending from Checo and also trying to attack Oscar. And Checo obviously tries to attack Charles and Oscar. And that was extremely, extremely stressful, but it was great at the same time to watch. And then near the end of the race, Oscar finally pulls out a gap from Charles, who's left to scrabble with Checo and also Carlos, who got into the fight. And on lap 50, Checo goes for a move on Charles in the first corner. Charles defends very aggressively, which allows Carlos to get ahead of Checo. And then after turn 2, Charles has kind of pulled away, and Checo and Carlos both try to get into his slipstream, but end up colliding into each other, into the wall, which was very scary, not gonna lie. I thought for a second it was Charles that got caught by Checo, but it was Carlos. They were both, thank God, okay. So that means George Russell moves up to the podium, Lando to P4, Max P5, Fernando 6, Alex P7, Franco P8, Hamilton in P9, and Ollie Berman closing the top 10. Race ends under a virtual safety car, with Oscar winning the Azerbaijan Grand Prix and Charles unfortunately unable to break his curse of not converting pole to win in Baku. So that's the storyline in front, and now going to Lando's storyline. As I said, he started on the hards, on the alternative strategy, if you want to call it that. He makes quite a few overtakes in the beginning of the race and gets into the top 10 with the overtakes that he had and also people who were on mediums pitting before him. It gets to a point when Max, who has already pitted from mediums to hards, is behind Lando in DRS range, and they're kind of battling, but Lando is also stuck behind Alex, also in his DRS range, and both Alex and Lando are on hards from the beginning and still have to pit. And then on lap 32, Alex finally does pit, so that gives Lando some clean air that allows him to pull away from Max even without DRS. And George, who was behind Max at that point, overtakes him with Max really struggling. Then it's time for Lando to pit. He comes out 15 seconds behind Max on fresh mediums with 13 laps to go. He then manages to close that gap and overtake Max for what would have been P6 without the collision between Checo and Carlos, but ends up, as I said, P4 with Max in P5. So overall, great performances from both Oscar and Lando, of course. I do think that Lando starting from the back of the grid kind of saved McLaren from themselves in terms of their strategy and their bias towards Lando. I think if Lando would have started at the front, maybe the race wouldn't have gone that smoothly, and maybe we wouldn't have been so happy with the results as we are now. But I guess we'll find out in Singapore what happens with their team orders and their bias towards Lando. Mercedes need to sort their tire management out. Both drivers were struggling the whole weekend with getting tires to temperature and then keeping them in their operating window. Williams seemed to have figured something out with both cars ending in the points and with some pretty big points. I hope they continue this way. Again, Franco did a really good job getting the car to P8, which without the collision up ahead would have been P10, so he would have still gotten a point. So great job once again. I'm very sad that we won't see you next year in F1, unfortunately. I mean, maybe still there's Sauber. We can put you in Sauber, so there's still hope. Ferrari are probably one of the biggest losers today. Obviously, P2 is a great result on paper, but they were forecasted for the win, and they were forecasted for a double podium, I would even say. And I also think that they were the quickest car in Baku from the very start of the weekend. They were the quickest car, and it was just a few mistakes from Charles with defending from Oscar, his in and out lap, which were slow, and then being in dirty air for the majority of the race, and then his tires falling off the cliff at the end. All of that cost them the win. And then, of course, Carlos, who unfortunately didn't finish and had that huge accident. Red Bull, kind of mixed results. Checo obviously had a really, really good weekend, of course, until he crashed with Carlos, as I said. And I feel bad for him. I do. You have to. I mean, I don't really even like him. But he was doing great. He outqualified Max, as I said, for the first time this season. He was going to outscore Max for the first time since actually Baku last year. And he's been on a not so great streak this season. Didn't have great results. And he finally figured something out, either within himself or the car felt good. And it's Baku. He's great around here. He's the only driver to win more than once here. So he was really on it, and it's a shame for what happened. But then on the other hand, we have Max really, really struggling with brakes and his tires, not only in the race, but also kind of in qualifying. I think he said that they did a final setup change before quali that made the car not good for him, or not good in general, I guess. Because again, they were strong in practice, so I don't know. And then McLaren, of course. We're finally leading the championship. Oh my god. We haven't done this in 10 years. The last time McLaren leaded the championship was in 2014. The last time McLaren won the championship was in 1980 something. I can't remember the exact year, but whatever. It was a long time ago. So well done for us for leading right now, and well done for the possibility that we're probably maybe gonna win. I don't want to jinx it. One more thing I wanted to mention, of course, is that Nicole Piastri, Oscar's mom, was present for this win. She finally got to witness firsthand her son win an F1 race. And honestly, I'm happy that it was in Baku and that she wasn't in Hungary, because that race was... This is a much happier win. Great podium as well with Oscar, Charles, and George, who once again got on the podium due to two people colliding ahead of him. But good for him for putting himself in the position to be there to collect those results. This is also the first podium in F1 that has all three F2 champions. And not only F2 champions who won that championship in their rookie year. So nice little statistic. Also, another curious statistic is that Oliver Berman becomes the first driver in F1 to score points for two different constructors in his first two races. So good job, Ollie. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I really, really enjoyed this race. It was not only I had good results for the people I like, but it was also a good race. Had me on the edge of my seat for 30 something laps. I mean, it's one thing going into a race not knowing what's going to happen. It's a whole other thing not knowing what's going to happen till the very end. So I loved it. This is such a good season. It's such a good season. I cannot wait to see how everything turns out. With the Constructors' Championship, I think it's in McLaren's pocket, but we can never know. In the drivers, I think it's gonna get down to Abu Dhabi. Max is in contention, obviously. Lando is in contention. Charles is in contention. I think technically Oscar's also in contention. It's not going to happen, but he is. He is in contention, so we can't rule it out. Mathematically, it's possible. So on one hand, I can't wait for the season to end to see what happens, but also I don't want this season to end ever. It's such a great season, y'all. I am so happy right now. Okay, I think I didn't miss anything. I think I got everything covered. And if not, I'll write it in the description or comments, or you'll comment it for me to talk about. So, thank you for watching. Enjoy these memes. Bye!